"We have nowhere to go, Grandpa," little Arthur whispered, his tiny body trembling with cold as the wind howled through the cracks of the ruined castle. Hunger gnawed at them, each breath a cruel reminder of the misery that had exiled them. Elias, the elderly widower, felt his heart torn, the promise of protecting his grandsons echoing hollowly in his mind. He had lost everything, and now the light in the boy's eyes seemed to dim with the dying sun. As darkness swallowed the last vestiges of hope, a sharp cry tore through the gloomy silence. The elder boy, Thomas, had stumbled upon something in the old library, something that promised not just an end, but the key to a long-buried legacy, and what they were about to discover would change his family's destiny forever. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine, not just from the cold that pierced his bones, but from Thomas's sudden cry. His heart, already so heavy with grief, leaped, fearing the worst in that desolate place. "Thomas! What happened, my boy?" he called, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and worry. His steps, previously dragging, gained urgency as he hurried towards the sound, leaving Arthur huddled near the dying fire. The old library, a heap of empty shelves and dust, seemed even gloomier in the faint lantern light. As he approached, he saw Thomas kneeling, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with childlike surprise. The boy pointed to a crack in the stone wall, which had given way under the weight of a book, revealing a dark, narrow space. "Grandpa, look, there's something here!" Thomas exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. Elias knelt with difficulty, feeling the stiffness in his knees, and reached out his trembling hand to the crevice. Ancient dust rose, but curiosity and hope propelled him. Carefully he fumbled inside the hidden compartment. His fingers found the roughness of ancient fabric and the stiffness of something that felt like parchment. He pulled out a package wrapped in faded cloth, which revealed a set of yellowed maps and a leather-bound journal. The smell of mold and old paper filled the air. Elias held the objects with reverence, as if they were made of fragile glass. Arthur's and Thomas's eyes, which had drawn closer, fixed on the items, hunger forgotten. "What is it, Grandpa?" Arthur asked, his voice an almost inaudible whisper. Elias, his heart pounding in his chest, opened the journal. The pages, in elegant but faded handwriting, told a story of a forgotten lineage, of heirs to that ruined castle, and of a secret valley, of abundance hidden in the mountains. With each word his tired eyes deciphered, a flame ignited within him, one he thought had been extinguished forever. He looked up at his grandsons, whose thin faces reflected the flickering lantern light. Hope danced in their eyes, a promise that perhaps destiny had something different in store for them. Elias felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. It wasn't gold or jewels that Thomas had found, but something far more precious, the possibility of a future, the chance to fulfill his promise, to protect the boys who were all he had left. He clutched the journal to his chest, a gesture of gratitude and newfound courage. "My boys," Elias began, his voice choked with emotion, "I think we've found our way home." His tear-filled eyes fixed on the maps, imagining the trails and rivers, the challenges and rewards. The journey would be arduous, he knew, but the sight of his grandsons, their eyes shining with curiosity, was the fuel he needed. The castle, once a refuge of despair, now seemed like a portal to hope. The cold night still enveloped them, but the warmth of a new promise began to warm their hearts. They were no longer alone in their misery. They had a mission, a legacy to reclaim. The flickering lantern illuminated Elias's eyes, now shining with renewed determination. The journal in his hands was not a burden, but a treasure. Arthur and Thomas, sitting close by, watched their grandpa, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and hope. "This valley," Elias began, his voice firmer, "is a place of promise, my boys, where the land is generous and the water runs pure." He unfolded the maps, their edges frayed, revealing winding trails, mountains and rivers, a path that seemed impossible but the only way out. Arthur, the youngest, pointed. "Is it very far, Grandpa?" His small voice carried uncertainty. Elias smiled, tired but genuine. "Yes, my little one, it's a long journey, but we won't be alone. We'll have each other's strength and the hope this journey has brought us." He knew the truth. The journey would be arduous, fraught with dangers. The cold, hunger, wild animals, everything would be amplified in the vastness of nature. That night, Elias's sleep was restless. Images of the fertile valley mingled with visions of the icy mountains. He rose before dawn, while Arthur and Thomas slept. With the lantern, he studied the maps, mentally tracing each step. They needed food, water, protection from the cold. What did they have? Almost nothing. The clothes on their backs, a dull knife, and courage forged by despair. He approached the boys, observing their pale, thin faces. The love for them was a fire that burned in his chest, stronger than any fear. It was for them that he would make this journey, face the unknown. "We will need strength, my children," he whispered into the cold air, "and faith." He began to organize the little they had: stale bread, dried fruit, an empty water skin. Each item was counted, scarcity a palpable reality. Thomas awoke with his grandpa's movement, his eyes fixed on Elias, who was putting away the maps. "Are we leaving today, Grandpa?" he asked, his voice sleepy, but with a glint of adventure. Elias nodded, a lump in his throat. "Yes, Thomas, as soon as the sun rises. We cannot waste time." He felt the weight of the decision, the immense responsibility. The alternative, to remain in the castle awaiting death, was unthinkable. Arthur also awoke. Elias hugged them tightly, feeling their tiny bodies. "We will find our home," he promised, more to himself than to them. Morning arrived, bringing a grey sky and biting wind. The castle, once a refuge, now seemed like a prison. With their few belongings tied in makeshift bundles, Elias took each boy's hand. His heart pounded, a mixture of fear and stubborn hope. As they crossed the ruined gate, Elias looked back. The castle, silent, whispered farewells, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains, promising the secret valley. The journey began. Each step was an act of faith, a silent, fervent prayer for his grandson's protection. They walked towards the unknown, with the journal and the maps, the unwavering love that bound them, the chance to rewrite their destiny, the promise of a future. Once a distant dream was the guiding star that pulled them forward. The icy morning breeze bit at Elias's and his grandson's exposed skin as they moved away from the castle. The path, which on the map seemed merely a winding line, was in reality an almost impassable trail, covered with loose stones and low-lying vegetation that scratched their legs. Arthur, his small, already aching feet, stumbled, and Elias held him firmly, feeling the grandson's tiny body tremble. "It's all right, my love," he murmured, stroking the boy's tangled hair, while his own heart tightened with worry. Thomas, a little ahead, tried to keep their spirits up, pointing to rock formations and imagining stories of giants and dragons, an effort to distract himself and his brother from the cruel reality of the journey. Elias observed their efforts, a mixture of pride and anguish in his chest. With each step, the mountains seemed to grow, imposing and threatening, and the promise of the secret valley, once so vivid, began to seem like a distant, almost unattainable dream. The sun rose slowly, but its heat was insufficient to ward off the persistent cold. The water in the water skin was almost gone, and the dry bread they had brought seemed to shrink with each bite. Elias felt the weakness in his own legs, every muscle protesting the effort. He stopped under the shade of an overhanging rock, unfolding the map with trembling hands. The line marking the path seemed to stretch infinitely. "Grandpa, are we lost?" Arthur asked, his voice choked, his large eyes filled with tears he tried to hold back. Elias's gaze met Thomas's, who, though older, also carried uncertainty in his expression. The old man felt a lump in his throat. The truth was, he didn't know. The map was old, the natural landmarks might have changed, but he could not allow despair to take hold. He knelt, hugging both boys. "No, my dears, we are not lost. We are just exploring. This map is a guide, but nature has its own secrets. We need to be patient and strong." He forced a smile, trying to convey a confidence he barely felt. "Remember what the journal said, Thomas? That the valley is for those who persist, for the pure of heart." Thomas nodded, a ray of hope crossing his face. "Yes, Grandpa, the journal speaks of rivers with clear waters and trees laden with fruit." Elias took the boy's hands, feeling the fragility of their fingers. "Exactly, and that's what we're going to find. But for that, we need to keep going, one step at a time." The afternoon advanced, and the boys' exhaustion was evident. Arthur could barely drag his feet, and Thomas, though more resilient, also showed signs of exhaustion. Elias carried the bundles, the journal, and the maps, feeling the weight of responsibility on his stooped shoulders. He knew they needed to find shelter before night fell, but the rocky landscape offered few options. Suddenly Thomas stopped, pointing to a small crack in the rock, almost imperceptible. "Grandpa, look. It looks like a small cave." Elias approached, and indeed, there was a shallow recess, large enough to shelter them from the wind and the most intense cold. It was a relief, a small miracle in the midst of desolation. They squeezed into the shelter, and Elias lit a small fire with dry twigs he found nearby. The weak but welcome warmth began to drive the cold from their bones. He divided the last piece of bread, watching the boys eat eagerly, their eyes fixed on the flames. That moment of togetherness and warmth was a balm for his weary soul. As darkness swallowed the mountains, Elias hugged his grandsons, feeling the rhythm of their breaths. The journey was long and uncertain, but the flame of hope, kindled by the journal, still burned in his chest. He looked at the map, the firelight dancing over the ancient lines. The valley was there, waiting for them. He would do everything to get them there, no matter the cost. The promise of a better future was the strength that propelled him with every beat of his tired, resilient heart. The next morning brought an even more biting cold, seeping into the small rock crevice where they had spent the night. Elias awoke before his grandsons, feeling every bone in his body protest. The last piece of bread had been divided the night before, and hunger was already gnawing at their stomachs again. He observed Arthur and Thomas huddled next to each other, their faces pale and lips chapped. A heavy sigh escaped his lips, but he swallowed it, transforming it into determination. "Come on, my little ones," he whispered, gently touching Thomas's shoulder. "The sun is already stretching. We have a long way ahead." Thomas blinked, his eyes still heavy with sleep, but soon sat up, rubbing his arms. Arthur, more sensitive to the cold and exhaustion, grumbled, nestling closer to his grandpa. Elias hugged him, feeling the fragile warmth of the boy's body. "Courage, my Arthur. Soon we will find something to warm our hearts and our stomachs." The trail that day was even more treacherous. The mountains, once distant, now surrounded them, their steep, rocky slopes seeming impassable. The map, which Elias consulted every few steps, showed a narrow gorge, a passage that promised to shorten the way, but which in reality was a labyrinth of slippery stones and deep crevices. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying with it the smell of ice and earth. Arthur began to cry, his small sobs echoing in the silent vastness. "I'm cold, Grandpa, and hungry." Elias felt his heart tighten, a sharp pain of helplessness. He knelt, pulling Arthur into a tight embrace, while Thomas, with tear-filled eyes, looked at his grandpa, seeking strength. "I know, my love, I know. But we are strong, aren't we? We are a family, and families never give up on each other." He pointed to a spot on the map where a thin line indicated a stream. "Look, the journal says there's fresh water just beyond this gorge, and where there's water there's life, perhaps even some wild berries." Hope, however faint, was what kept them moving. Elias took each boy's hand, carefully pulling them through the rocks. His own knees ached and his breathing was heavy, but he could not falter. As they reached a narrower part of the gorge, they came across a huge rock that had collapsed, completely blocking the passage. Elias's heart sank. It was an insurmountable obstacle for their tired and hungry bodies. He tried to move the stone, but it was too heavy. Despair threatened to swallow him, and for an instant he closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his promise. Thomas, however, pointed to a small crack in the rock wall, almost hidden by the shadow. "Grandpa, look! It's small, but maybe we can pass one at a time." Elias opened his eyes, seeing the small opening. It was tight, dangerous, but it was a chance. He instructed Thomas to go first, crawling carefully. Then he helped Arthur through, gently pushing him. Finally, Elias, with the bundle on his back, squeezed through the crack, scratching his skin, but feeling immense relief to see his grandsons on the other side. They had made it. The small victory ignited a new flame in Elias. The stream was not far from there, and as promised in the journal, its waters were crystal clear. They drank eagerly, feeling life return to their bodies. Elias found some edible wild berries, and the boys devoured them with gratitude. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, and they found a small recess under an ancient tree to spend the night. Elias hugged the boys, feeling the fragility of life, but also the unbreakable strength of love. The journey was long and uncertain, but the flame of hope, kindled by the journal, still burned in his chest. He looked at the map, the firelight dancing over the ancient lines. The valley was there, waiting for them. He would do everything to get them there, no matter the cost. The promise of a better future was the strength that propelled him, with every beat of his tired, resilient heart. The next morning brought with it a silent but tangible promise. The sun, more benevolent, caressed the mountains, melting the icy dew and revealing the austere beauty of the landscape. Elias awoke with a lingering ache in his muscles, but a lightness in his spirit he hadn't felt in a long time. The boys, Arthur and Thomas, still slept deeply, their serene faces under the soft light. He watched them, feeling love overflowing in his chest, a strength that overcame any weariness. The green patch they had spotted the day before was now a beacon, a point of hope that pulled them forward. After a frugal breakfast with the last of the gathered berries, Elias and the boys resumed their walk. The descent of the slope was less treacherous, and with each step, the green patch seemed to grow, promising relief. Thomas, with his innate curiosity, went ahead, exploring each rock formation, while Arthur, more animated after a night's rest, held his grandpa's hand, skipping occasionally. Elias felt hope blooming, but the caution from years of suffering prevented him from fully surrendering to joy. He knew that nature was unpredictable, and the secret valley was still an unknown. As they approached the green area, the landscape began to change. Rocks gave way to more fertile soil, and dense bushes with vibrant leaves emerged from among the stones. The air became more humid and fragrant, with the smell of wet earth and lush vegetation. Thomas, who had gone on ahead a bit, stopped abruptly, his eyes wide. "Grandpa, look!" His voice, a mixture of awe and excitement, echoed. Elias and Arthur hurried their pace, catching up with the boy. Before them, a deep gorge stretched out, but it wasn't the chasm that took their breath away. On the other side, a structure rose, defying time and oblivion. It was an ancient stone bridge, imposing and surprisingly well preserved. that spanned the gorge with an elegance that contrasted with the wildness of the mountains. Moss and small plants clung to its stones, but the structure was solid, its arches designed with a precision that spoke of forgotten engineering. It wasn't a wild trail, but a constructed path, a portal to something more. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. The journal mentioned hidden paths, but he had never imagined anything so grand. "A bridge!" Arthur exclaimed, his eyes shining. "Where does it go, Grandpa?" Elias touched the cold stone of the bridge, feeling the ancient roughness beneath his fingers. It was a turning point, an undeniable sign that they were on the right path, guided by more than just hope. The bridge was not just a passage. It was a concrete promise, evidence that the forgotten lineage had, in fact, built and cared for its access to the valley. Elias's heart filled with overwhelming gratitude. They weren't just following a map, they were unraveling a legacy. The journey, which once seemed a solitary struggle against nature, now revealed itself as a pilgrimage guided by ancestors, an unbreakable link between past and future. With a smile that reached his tired eyes, Elias squeezed his grandson's hands. "My boys, this bridge will lead us closer to our true home." Elias squeezed his grandson's hands, feeling the warmth and fragility of their fingers. The bridge, a marvel of ancient engineering, stretched ahead, a silent promise of a less arduous path. The wind blew through the gorge, making Elias's white hair flutter and the boy's thin clothes ripple. Arthur, with wide eyes, looked into the depth below, a childlike fear evident on his face. Thomas, in turn, was fascinated, his curiosity overcoming apprehension. "Is it safe, Grandpa?" Arthur asked, his voice a whisper. Elias smiled, a smile that reached his tired eyes. "Yes, my little one. It was built to last. Our ancestors were wise and strong. They guided us here, and this bridge is proof of their faith in us." He took the first step, the sole of his worn boot meeting the cold, firm stone. "Come, together." With a hand in each boy's, Elias began the crossing. With each step he felt the solidity of the structure beneath his feet, a welcome contrast to the treacherous mountain trails. Thomas walked with an air of discovery, touching the mosses that clung to the stones, imagining who could have built something so grand. Arthur, though still apprehensive, felt the security of Elias's hand and Thomas's presence beside him, and his fear began to subside, replaced by a growing sense of wonder. In the middle of the bridge, Elias paused for a moment, looking at the distant valley that opened beyond. The green patch they had spotted now seemed more defined, more inviting. He felt a deep, almost overwhelming emotion rise in his throat. It wasn't just a physical passage. It was a passage to a new life, a testament to his family's resilience and his ancestors' wisdom. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away, not wanting to worry the boys. As they reached the other side, the landscape changed dramatically. The soil was softer, covered in lush grass and dotted with vibrant wildflowers. Tall, leafy trees rose, their dense canopies creating a welcoming shade. The air was softer, warmer, and carried a sweet scent of fertile earth and flowers. There was no longer the biting howl of the wind or the aridity of the rocks. Thomas let go of Elias's hand and ran a few steps, laughing as dry leaves crunched beneath his feet. Arthur, seeing his brother's joy, also let go, his eyes shining with new energy. They were in a different place, a place that seemed untouched by the desolation of the outside world. Elias watched them, immense relief flooding his being. He knelt, feeling the softness of the grass beneath his hands. The journal had not lied. This was the threshold of his promise. He took the journal from his bundle, opening it to the page that described the entrance to the valley. His eyes scanned the ancient words, and a genuine deep smile spread across his face. "My boys," he called, his voice choked with emotion, "look at this. The journal says this is the path of ancient trees, the prelude to the valley. We are almost there. This is the land our ancestors guarded for us. Thomas and Arthur ran to him, their faces lit up with hope. Elias hugged them tightly, feeling the warmth of their bodies and the beat of their hearts. The journey had not yet ended, but most of the darkness was behind them. They had crossed the bridge, not just of stone, but from despair to hope, from uncertainty to a future that, for the first time in a long time, seemed promising and full of life. The secret valley awaited them, and they were ready to find it, united by an unwavering love and the promise of a new home. Elias's heart pulsed with a mixture of relief and an almost overwhelming hope. The journal's words, "Path of ancient trees," resonated in his mind like a long-forgotten melody. Arthur and Thomas, their eyes shining, looked at him, childlike anticipation painted on their dirty faces, but now filled with a new light. Elias pressed them against him, smelling the earth and sweat, but also the sweet scent of the emerging flowers. "Yes, my loves, this is the path." The journal speaks of trees as ancient as the mountains, which hold secrets and lead to a place of peace. They entered what appeared to be a forest. It wasn't the dense, dark forest Elias knew from his childhood memories, but a grove of majestic trees whose twisted trunks told stories of centuries. Sunlight filtered through the canopies, creating a play of dancing shadows on the moss-covered ground and dry leaves. The air was fresh and pure, unlike the biting wind of the heights. Thomas, always the more adventurous, ran ahead, pointing to a blue-feathered bird flying among the branches. Arthur, more reserved but equally fascinated, held Elias's hand, feeling the texture of an ancient tree's bark. With each step, the landscape became more lush. Small streams of crystal-clear water meandered among the exposed roots, and Elias knelt so the boys could drink, watching them with a smile. The water was fresh and invigorating, washing away the dust and weariness of the journey. He felt a peace he had not experienced in a long time, a sense that they were finally in the right place. However, the vastness of the forest, however welcoming, still presented a challenge. The journal mentioned that the valley was hidden, and Elias knew the path would not be simple, even here. As they advanced, the path of ancient trees began to grow denser. The trees closed in on them, and the trail, once evident, seemed to disappear under a blanket of leaves. Elias consulted the journal again, his brows furrowed in concern. It speaks of a whispering corner, where the trees speak to each other, and the path reveals itself only to those who listen with their hearts. He murmured, more to himself than to the boys. Thomas, noticing his grandpa's hesitation, looked at the trees, trying to hear something. Arthur, tired from the walk, began to fidget. Elias felt a lump in his throat. They had come so far, but uncertainty still lingered. He closed his eyes for an instant, seeking the strength he always found in his love for his grandsons. He opened them again and saw Thomas pointing to a particular tree whose trunk was wider and more twisted than the others, with a crack that looked like an eye. "Grandpa, look! It seems to be calling us!" Elias approached, and upon touching the rough bark, felt a subtle vibration. The journal described a silent guardian, a tree that marked the turning point. With a sigh of relief, Elias followed the direction the crack in the tree seemed to indicate. The trail revealed itself again, narrower but clear, winding among the trees. That small obstacle, the momentary doubt, had been overcome by intuition and faith. The sun began to set, tinging the sky with shades of orange and purple, and they found a small clearing to spend the night, nestled under the protection of the ancient trees. Elias hugged the boys, feeling the warmth of their bodies. The valley was not yet visible, but with each step, the promise of a new home became more real, more palpable, guided by the wisdom of ancestors and the unwavering strength of their love. The next morning brought with it a sense of clarity and purpose. Elias awoke with a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time, the sun filtering in golden beams through the tree canopy, painting dancing patterns on the ground. Arthur and Thomas, still asleep, seemed more serene than ever, their childlike faces illuminated by a newfound peace. Elias watched them, his heart overflowing with deep gratitude. The night under the silent guardian had been the most peaceful, a premonition that they were on the right path. With a sigh of renewal, he rose, stretching his muscles that still ached, but with an energy that seemed to spring from the fertile earth itself. After a frugal breakfast with the few remaining berries, they resumed their walk. The trail, once uncertain, now showed itself more defined, a natural corridor winding among the monumental trunks. Thomas went ahead, his eyes curious, pointing to every new flower or insect they found, his voice full of childlike excitement. Arthur, with his hand firmly in Elias's, walked with more confidence, his small steps echoing the hope he felt. Elias, however, maintained caution. The journal had been clear. The valley was a well-kept secret, and nature, however generous, could always present new challenges. As they advanced, the trail began to gently ascend, leading them to a denser part of the forest. The trees became taller, their canopies so dense that sunlight could barely penetrate, creating an eternal twilight under the canopy. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the muffled sound of their own footsteps. Suddenly, the trail split into three almost identical paths, all equally covered with leaves and moss. Elias stopped, his heart tightening. The journal did not mention a fork. He consulted the map, but the ancient lines seemed confused at that point, as if the forest itself wanted to test their faith. A wave of discouragement threatened to swallow him. Had they come so close, only to get lost again? He felt the questioning gaze of Thomas and Arthur's apprehension. "Which way, Grandpa?" Thomas asked, his voice low, noticing his grandpa's hesitation. Elias felt the weight of the decision. He closed his eyes for an instant, seeking the wisdom of the ancestors, the intuition that had guided him there. He remembered the journal's words about listening with your heart. He opened his eyes, looking at each path, trying to feel something, a vibration, a call. Arthur, who was closer to the middle path, pointed to the ground. "Grandpa, look!" A blue feather. Dri. It was the same blue feather they had seen on the bird the day before, a small sign, but for Elias it was a beacon. He knelt, picking up the feather, and a warmth spread through his chest. "It's a sign, my boys. Our winged friends are guiding us." He chose the middle path, feeling an unwavering certainty, a guidance that came from a place deeper than reason. They continued, and with each step, the air grew more humid, and a soft sound, like the murmur of many waters, began to be heard. The smell of wet earth and lush vegetation intensified. The path opened, and through the foliage, Elias glimpsed a shimmer. They emerged from the dense forest into a stunning clearing. Before them, an imposing waterfall stretched out, whose crystal-clear waters descended from an impressive height, forming a wide, serene river that meandered through a verdant valley. Sunlight bathed the scene, revealing a profusion of flowers of all colors, fruit-laden trees, and grass so green it looked painted. The air was sweet, fragrant, and the sound of the waterfall was a welcoming melody, a hymn to the life that pulsed there. It was the valley, the secret valley. Elias felt his legs give way. He fell to his knees on the soft grass, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face, not from sadness, but from a joy and gratitude so profound he could barely bear it. His calloused hands trembled as he brought them to his chest, feeling every beat of his exhausted but now full heart. Arthur and Thomas, without waiting, ran to the river's edge, their pure, crystal-clear laughter echoing in the vastness of the newly discovered paradise. "Grandpa, it's beautiful," Arthur cried, his eyes shining with an intensity Elias hadn't seen in months. "It's our home," Thomas added, extending his arms to the valley as if to embrace it, as if he recognized that place as the destiny of his soul. Elias watched them, his heart overflowing with an emotion that transcended weariness and pain. The promise had been fulfilled. Unwavering faith, resilience forged in adversity, and the unbreakable love that bound them had guided them there, to their refuge, the legacy of their ancestors. Hope was not just a distant word, but the very essence of life, blooming in every leaf, every drop of water, every smile of his grandsons. The future, which was once a fog of uncertainties, now opened like a vast and promising horizon, an invitation to start anew, to live. Elias remained there, kneeling, his calloused hands on the soft grass, feeling the damp, living earth beneath his fingers. The tears previously contained now rolled freely, washing away the dust of years of suffering, of fear, of a pain that seemed to have rooted itself in his very soul. It was not a pain of sadness, but of a joy so profound that it made his chest ache in a new, almost unbearable way. His eyes, blurred by emotion, fixed on Arthur and Thomas, who ran and laughed by the river's edge, their small, vibrant silhouettes against the splendor of the waterfall. The sound of their laughter, once so rare and muffled, now echoed pure and crystal clear, filling the valley with a melody of life. It was the music he had dreamed of, the promise he had made to his beloved wife, now fulfilled. With an effort, Elias rose, feeling his legs shaky, no longer from weariness, but from the emotional release. He walked slowly towards the boys, each step a victory over the past. As he approached, Arthur ran to him, hugging his legs tightly, his childlike face upturned and his eyes shining. "Grandpa, look! There are fish in the river, and flowers that smell so sweet, like Grandma's garden." Thomas, a little further away, pointed to a tree laden with bright red fruits, his eyes wide with admiration and his mouth slightly open. "Can we eat them, Grandpa? Can we really?" Elias knelt again, hugging both grandsons, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against his. The sweet scent of flowers and fruits hung in the air, mingling with the freshness of the water falling from the waterfall. "Yes, my loves, we can eat, we can drink. This place is ours. It is our home, our refuge." He picked one of the red fruits from the tree Thomas pointed to, feeling its smooth, firm skin. The first sip of river water was like a balm for his soul, pure and refreshing, unlike anything they had drunk recently. The fruit, sweet and juicy, burst in his mouth, a taste of hope, of abundance that seemed unreal. For an instant, a shadow of doubt crossed his heart. Was it real? Could such beauty and peace be true after so much misery and desolation? He hugged the boys tighter, as if to anchor himself in the reality of their smiles, in the innocence of their joy. The journal of his ancestors had not lied. That was the inheritance, the refuge guarded for generations, now revealed to them. With renewed energy, Elias began to explore the valley with the boys. The journal, which he kept safe in his bundle, described not only the entrance, but also the topography of the valley, mentioning a rock shelter, a protected spot with a nearby water source. They followed the riverbank, which led them to a higher area, where imposing rock formations rose, offering natural shelter. Among the rocks, Elias found a shallow but spacious cave, with a dry floor and an opening that allowed light and air in, but would protect them from wind and rain. It was simple, but it seemed like a palace after the ruins of the castle. "Here," he said, his voice full of new authority and contained emotion. "Here will be our first home, a safe place to begin our new life." Thomas and Arthur ran into the cave, exploring every corner with enthusiasm, their small cries of joy echoing softly. Elias watched them, a genuine smile on his lips, feeling the weight of the world. which had once bent him, finally dissipate. That place was not just a hiding place, it was a new beginning, a sanctuary. The promise of his ancestors, the faith that had been tested to its limit, now bloomed in a valley of abundance. He knew that there would still be challenges. Life was never completely easy. But there, in that paradise, they would have the chance to build a future, to heal the wounds of the past, and to live in peace. Elias knelt again, but this time it was to give thanks, not with tears of pain, but with the serenity of one who had found his place in the world. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the valley prepared for the night. A night that would be the first of many in their new and blessed home. The first night in the rock shelter was different from all the others. The air inside the cave was fresh and soft, without the biting cold of the mountains or the dampness of the castle ruins. Elias, lying on an improvised bed of dry leaves and moss, watched the small flames of a fire he had lit with dry branches, the warmth dancing on the rocky walls. Arthur and Thomas slept deeply beside him, their serene faces free from the marks of hunger and fear that had accompanied them for so long. Elias felt a peace that had not dwelled in his heart for a long time. It was not just physical safety, it was the feeling that finally they had reached their destination, a place where they could let their guard down. He spent the night in vigil, not out of fear, but out of silent gratitude, watching the moonlight peek through the opening, painting the floor with silver. With the dawn, the valley awoke in an explosion of colors and sounds. The bird song was a joyful symphony, and the smell of dew and fertile earth filled the air. Elias, with muscles still aching but his soul light, prepared a breakfast with the fruits gathered the day before and fresh river water. The boys ate with a ravenous appetite, their eyes shining with renewed energy. "Grandpa, can we explore?" Thomas asked, barely finishing chewing. Arthur, more timid, just nodded his head, his eyes pleading. Elias smiled, a smile that reached every wrinkle of his face. "Yes, my little explorers, but carefully. This place is ours, but we still need to get to know it." They spent the day exploring the immediate surroundings of the cave. The journal mentioned that the rock shelter was near a source of wisdom, and Elias felt that this source was not just water. They followed a small stream that originated from the waterfall, winding among fruit-laden trees and bushes with juicy berries. With each bend, nature revealed its generosity. The boys ran ahead, their cries of joy echoing in the vastness of the valley, discovering colorful insects and exotic flowers. Elias watched them, his heart swollen with love and renewed responsibility. It was no longer just about surviving. It was about prospering, building a worthy future for these boys. While the boys played near a small lake formed by the stream, Elias was drawn to a peculiar rock formation, an outcrop that seemed to have been sculpted by nature into the shape of a large chair, almost a throne. As he approached, he noticed that the rock was not entirely natural. There were time-worn carvings, symbols he recognized from his ancestors' journal. He ran his hand over the cold surface, feeling the history that emanated from it, and then his fingers found a small, almost imperceptible indentation, covered with moss and ivy. Carefully, he removed the vegetation, revealing a small cavity. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, a small, dark wooden chest, inlaid with the same ancestral symbols. Elias's heart pounded. He picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the weight of antiquity. Upon opening it, he found a rolled parchment, finer and better preserved than the journal, and a small seed, with a pearly sheen unlike any seed he had ever seen. The parchment was a letter, written in elegant handwriting, the last message from one of the ancestors, the same one who had started the journal. The words, though ancient, were clear and resonated with millennial wisdom. "To the guardian who finds this valley," the letter read, Know that true wealth is not in gold, but in the earth that nourishes, the water that quenches, and the love that unites. This seed is hope, the beginning of a new cycle. Plant it with faith, care for it with tenderness, and it will flourish, blessing this land and your lineage with abundance and peace. The valley is a sanctuary, but its prosperity depends on your care and your connection to the land and to those who will come after you. Be the link, the sower of a future. Tears returned to Elias's eyes, but this time they were tears of deep understanding, of a purpose that revealed itself with crystal clarity. It wasn't just a refuge, it was a mission. He wasn't just an exiled grandfather, he was the guardian of a legacy, the sower of a new era. The pearly seed in his hand seemed to pulse with life, a tangible promise of a future that he, Elias, would build. He looked at Arthur and Thomas, who were approaching, curious. This was the climax of his journey, the transition from survivor to builder, from a past of losses to a future of abundance, guided by the wisdom of those who came before and by the unwavering love for his grandsons. The valley was not just a home, it was the garden of hope, and he, Elias, was its gardener. Elias raised the pearly seed, feeling its soft glow between his calloused fingers. His eyes, previously tear-filled with the emotion of discovery, now fixed on his grandsons with renewed clarity, an unwavering purpose. "My boys," he said, his voice choked but firm, "this is no ordinary seed. It is the seed of our hope, the beginning of everything we will build here." Arthur and Thomas approached, their small faces turned to their grandpa, their curious eyes fixed on the small, shimmering object. Elias explained, with simple words full of affection, the ancestors' message, the promise of abundance and peace that the seed carried. Still that day, Elias chose a special spot to plant the seed, not far from the rock shelter where the earth was most fertile and the sun gently bathed the slope. With the hands that had dug for roots and sought refuge, he now opened a small cradle in the soft earth. Each movement was an act of faith, a silent prayer. Thomas, with his contagious energy, helped loosen the soil, while Arthur, more observant, carried water from the stream in a makeshift shell. Together the three planted the seed, and Elias covered it carefully, feeling the weight of the future in his hands. A deep and lasting peace settled in Elias's heart. The pain of his wife's loss, though never forgotten, no longer consumed him. Now it transformed into a driving force, a legacy of love that he saw blooming in his grandson's smiles and vitality. The valley was not just a hiding place, it was a testament to his family's resilience, a new beginning. In the days that followed, Elias dedicated himself to transforming the rock shelter into a true home. With branches and vines, he made a rudimentary door for the cave, and with smooth river stones, built a small fireplace for cooking and warmth. Comfortable beds, a sturdy table where meals were shared, and even small shelves for the few belongings they had managed to save. Every corner of that space breathed the love and effort of a family rebuilding its existence. Arthur and Thomas, with the innate curiosity of childhood, helped gather firewood and explore the surroundings, always under their grandpa's watchful eye. They discovered more fruit trees, medicinal herbs, and a small stream with abundant fish. Hunger, cold, and fear, which had once been constant companions, were now just distant memories, replaced by abundance and security. Elias felt his connection to the land and his ancestors stronger than ever. Each morning he visited the spot where the seed was planted, watering it with fresh water and the hope that overflowed from his chest. He knew that life in the valley would require work and dedication, but the prospect of building a prosperous future for Arthur and Thomas filled him with an energy he thought he had lost. The valley was the resolution of all his conflicts, The home denied to them, the abundance hunger had stolen, the peace despair had suffocated, and the purpose loss had obscured. There, in the heart of that hidden paradise, Elias, the grandfather, the guardian, the sower, found not just a refuge, but the fullness of life. Months turned into seasons, and seasons into years, weaving a new tapestry of life in the valley. The pearly seed, planted with such faith by Elias's calloused hands, sprouted with a silent strength, defying expectations. It was no ordinary plant. It was a majestic tree, with silver leaves and golden fruits, exuding a sweet fragrance, a gift from the earth and the ancestors. With each harvest, the tree offered more than food. It offered the certainty that the promise of abundance had been fulfilled, a living testament to providence. The rock shelter, which was once a simple cave, transformed into a welcoming home. With Elias's tireless dedication and time, the walls were lined with wood, the floor covered with soft furs, and a well-built chimney ensured warmth on cold nights. There were comfortable beds, a sturdy table where meals were shared, and even small shelves for the few belongings they had managed to save. Every corner of that space breathed the love and effort of a family rebuilding its existence. Arthur and Thomas, now taller and sturdier, were the picture of health and joy. Their eyes, once marked by hunger and fear, shone with the vivacity of carefree childhood. They ran through the valley, knowing every trail, every stream, every fruit tree. They learned from Elias the secrets of the land, the art of fishing in the river, and the wisdom of herbs. Thomas, with his inexhaustible curiosity, explored the rock formations, while Arthur, calmer, helped his grandpa cultivate the small gardens they had established. Their laughter filled the valley, a constant melody that warmed Elias's heart. Elias watched his grandsons with a love that overflowed. The pain of his wife's loss, though still present as an old scar, no longer paralyzed him. Now, it was part of his story, a reminder of the love that propelled him forward. His soul, torn by misery and exile, had found healing and fullness in that valley. He was no longer the old exiled widower, but the patriarch of a new lineage, the guardian of a paradise, the sower of a future. On a sunny afternoon, while the boys played near the waterfall, Elias sat under the shade of the silver tree, the one born from the pearly seed. He leafed through the ancestral journal, its yellowed pages filled with a story that now intertwined with his own. Justice, which he thought had been denied, had been found in the generosity of nature and the strength of his own spirit. Overcoming was not just a word, it was the very essence of his journey. He closed the journal, raising his gaze to the blue sky and the green immensity of the valley. The human connection, which seemed lost, flourished in the unbreakable bond with Arthur and Thomas. The family, once shattered by tragedy, was now a pillar of hope and love. Elias smiled, a serene and deep smile, feeling the warmth of the sun on his wrinkled face. That valley was not just a refuge, it was the materialization of a dream, the legacy of an eternal love. He had fulfilled his promise, and life in its infinite wisdom had granted him a future of abundance, peace, and a purpose that transcended time. The cycle was complete, and a new, vibrant and promising one had just begun. Elias felt this promise vibrate in every fiber of his being. The new cycle was not just an idea, but a reality with every dawn in the valley. The years had sculpted not only the marks of time on his face, but also the serenity of a man who had found his purpose. The silver tree, now majestic, was the pulsating heart of their home, its golden fruits a constant reminder of the generosity that faith and hard work could bring. Arthur and Thomas, no longer the hungry and frightened boys, were strong and curious youths, their skin tanned by the valley sun, and their eyes full of a light that reflected the peace and security surrounding them. Elias dedicated his mornings to teaching them the secrets of the land, the importance of each seed, the rhythm of the seasons. With his firm, confident hands, he showed them how to prepare the soil, harvest the fruits with respect, and care for the river. Thomas, with his vivacity, absorbed every lesson with enthusiasm, his incessant questions filling the air. He dreamed of exploring every corner of the valley, discovering new plants and animals. Arthur, in turn, was the patient apprentice, observing every gesture of his grandpa, understanding the depth of care and dedication. He felt a special connection to the land, protecting that paradise. On an autumn afternoon, as they harvested the last golden fruits, Elias sat with his grandsons under the shimmering branches of the silver tree. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. Elias picked up the ancestral journal, its pages worn but vivid. He read excerpts about the forgotten lineage, the courage of his ancestors, and the vision of a hidden sanctuary. Arthur's and Thomas's eyes shone with pride and admiration, realizing they were part of a legacy of resilience and hope. "This valley," Elias said, closing the journal and hugging the boys, "is not just a gift. It is a testament to our own strength, our ability to overcome. Always remember where we came from, the difficult days, and cherish every ray of sunshine, every drop of water, every fruit this land offers us." His words were a balm, reminding them that true wealth lay in gratitude, love, and connection. Misery and exile were now distant shadows, lessons that had strengthened their spirits. Night fell softly over the valley, and the aroma of the campfire mingled with the sweet scent of the silver tree. Inside the rock shelter, now a cozy home full of warmth, Elias watched his grandsons sleeping, their serene faces illuminated by the glow of the flames. He felt a pang of melancholy as he remembered his wife, but it was sweet, permeated by the certainty that she would be proud. His promise had been fulfilled, and the life they built was the most beautiful tribute to the love that bound them. The valley was more than a refuge. It was a symbol that, even in the greatest adversities, hope can sprout, justice can be found in providence, and family can be the foundation of a prosperous future. Elias, the old exiled widower, had become the guardian of a paradise, the patriarch of a renewed lineage. His grandsons, Arthur and Thomas, would be the next to carry that torch, to perpetuate the legacy of love, care, and abundance. The cycle had been completed, but the story of Elias and his family in the Valley of Hope was just beginning to flourish, an eternal testament to the strength of the human spirit.